There was no dramatic ending, no screaming, no betrayal I could point my finger at. Just an ordinary day that slipped into night, followed by silence so deep it made my chest ache. People always talk about heartbreak like it's an explosion, loud, chaotic, impossible to ignore. But when Marin left, it felt more like fog. Slow, creeping, and then she was gone. It had been weeks since she asked me if we could talk, that dreaded phrase people only use when something is about to shift. We sat at the kitchen table like strangers, the same table we'd chosen together years ago, the one we spilled wine on while assembling and swore we'd replace, but never did. Her voice didn't shake. Mine did. She said she didn't feel like herself anymore. That maybe she needed space to find out who she was without the title of wife weighing her down. I could see it in her eyes. She had already decided. She wasn't asking for my opinion. She was giving me a fact. I wish I could say I made a grand gesture to save our marriage, that I stood up and poured my heart out, begged her to stay. But I didn't. I nodded. Quietly. My voice caught in my throat, and I told her I understood, even though I didn't. Even though nothing about this made sense to me. After all the years we'd spent side by side, sharing dreams, disappointments, lazy Sundays, holidays that blurred together, she was just done. She packed light. Just a weekend bag. She left behind everything that really mattered. Her books, her framed photos, the scarf I gave her on our second anniversary that she once said she'd keep forever. When she hugged me goodbye, it felt like I was holding a ghost. And just like that, she was out the door. The days that followed felt like white noise. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went to work. I ate dinner alone. I answered the obligatory texts from friends who heard something happened. I told them I was fine. I wasn't. But I told them that anyway. I tried to convince myself I was being mature. That sometimes love doesn't mean possession. That people need to grow. But the truth is, I was scared. Not of being alone. I'd been lonely inside the marriage for months. What scared me was the idea that I might not have meant as much to her as she meant to me. I kept her contact in my phone. I didn't block her. I didn't text her either. I waited, not for her to return, but for the pain to fade. But it didn't. It just sat there, like a tight knot in the middle of my chest, refusing to budge. Then came the odd part. Marin didn't vanish. She posted on social media, smiling with friends, attending yoga classes, brunching with coworkers, all while I sat in the same house we built together, haunted by furniture we once chose hand in hand. How was she so okay? Did I ever matter to her the way she mattered to me? I started replaying everything. Her sudden disinterest 6 months before she left. The way she pulled away when I tried to hold her hand. The way her work trips became more frequent. But there was no proof of betrayal, no messages, no hidden second phone, no late-night calls. Just distance. Subtle, quiet, gradual. The kind that doesn't break your heart at once, but bleeds it dry over time. It would have been easier if she had yelled. If we'd had a big fight. At least then I'd have something solid to hold on to. But this was worse. She walked away peacefully, like our marriage was a coat she outgrew, something she once loved but didn't need anymore. I didn't expect to hear from her again. I was prepared to be a closed chapter in her book. I wasn't even angry, just numb. But then, one rainy evening, a knock on the door broke the stillness. I opened it to find her standing there, hair soaked, hands trembling, eyes red. She looked nothing like the woman who had walked out so confidently just weeks ago. She looked lost. And then she said my name, barely a whisper, like it hurt to speak. And I knew, in that moment, nothing was over. Not yet. She looked like someone who had been through a storm far bigger than the one soaking her clothes. Marin stood in the doorway, shivering, mascara streaked across her cheeks, gripping a crumpled tissue in one hand and her keys in the other, like she was still unsure if she'd made the right decision showing up. And for a long moment, neither of us spoke. It was surreal. This woman who once shared every morning with me, every laugh, every frustration, now looked like a stranger searching for permission to come inside. I didn't say anything clever. I didn't ask questions. I just stepped aside and let her in. She moved slowly, like someone stepping back into a dream they weren't sure they'd wake from. The house hadn't changed, but the air inside it had. I had. Everything was exactly where she left it. The photos still on the shelves, the blanket still folded over her side of the couch, the faint scent of the lavender soap she always used still lingering in the bathroom. But none of it felt like hers anymore. She sat on the edge of the couch, like a guest, clutching the throw pillow in her lap like a shield. I stayed standing. I wasn't trying to be distant. I just couldn't make myself sit next to her yet. I was scared of what I might hear, scared of what I might feel. She opened her mouth a few times, but the words didn't come easily. Eventually, she looked up at me with eyes I barely recognized, tired, raw, stripped of whatever armor she'd been wearing when she left. I thought I knew what I wanted, she whispered. I thought I needed to be alone to find myself. But it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like falling. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because a part of me had waited for this moment, not for her to come back, but to finally understand why she walked away in the first place. And now that it was happening, it felt almost too fragile to touch. She went on, her voice unsteady. Said she'd rented a small place across town, spent her nights reading self-help books, journaling, talking to a therapist. Said she tried to grow, to understand what went wrong between us. But the more she peeled away her layers, the more confused she became. She told me there wasn't another man. There had never been anyone else, just this internal unraveling, this restlessness she couldn't explain. Like something inside her kept whispering that she needed more, that she was disappearing in the routine of marriage. And yet, after all that, she still came back. Not to ask for forgiveness, she made that clear, but to tell me she missed me. Missed our late-night talks. Missed the way I always remembered to fill her car up with gas when it hit a quarter tank. Missed my dumb jokes. My quiet steadiness. Our life. I asked her why now. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, because the world outside this house isn't what I thought it would be. And because I finally realized that peace isn't about excitement or freedom or some mythical version of myself. It's about feeling safe, and I've never felt safer than I did with you. It would have been easy to fall into her words, to open my arms and pretend nothing had changed. But I couldn't, because I had changed. I had spent the last few months learning how to stand on my own 2 feet again. I had learned what it meant to be alone, not just physically, but emotionally. I'd stopped waiting for her to text, stopped checking her social media. I'd learned to eat at our table without setting a place for her, to sleep on my side of the bed without listening for her breathing. I missed her, yes, but I'd also begun to rediscover myself. So I looked at her and said the first honest thing I had spoken aloud in a long time. I don't know what this is anymore. She nodded slowly. I don't either. The truth was, I didn't hate her. Not even a little. But something between us had been severed, not by a scandal or a betrayal, but by time, silence, and slow disconnection. That kind of damage doesn't scream. It whispers. It chips away while you're busy making dinner and pretending everything's fine. We sat there in silence for a while, the kind of silence that once felt comfortable but now felt like a question mark. She asked if she could stay the night, just on the couch. Said she didn't want to be alone. I looked at her and felt that familiar ache rise in my chest, the one that had become a part of me since she left. And then I surprised both of us. I said yes, but not because I wanted to go back. Because some goodbyes deserve a second look, before you decide whether they were meant to last. That night, we didn't talk much. I gave her a fresh towel, set a pillow on the couch, and pulled out an old blanket from the hall closet, the same one she used to wrap herself in on winter mornings while sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She held it for a second before folding it over her lap like she wasn't sure if she had the right to be comforted by something that once felt like home. I stood in the hallway a few minutes after she settled in, listening to the stillness of the house. I thought I'd feel angry or betrayed or vindicated. But the truth is, I felt numb. Not cold. Not cruel. Just frozen in a moment I hadn't prepared for. It's strange. When someone you love walks away, you rehearse all the ways you'll confront them if they ever come back. You imagine what you'll say, what they'll say. You picture the dramatic apologies, the emotional breakdowns, the part where you either collapse into their arms or close the door for good. But none of that happened. There was no dramatic speech. No confessions. She simply lay there on the couch, breathing, blinking, clutching the edge of the blanket like it was the only thing tethering her to this house. To me. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed, our bed. The same bed she used to fall asleep in with her feet tucked under mine. Now it just felt like a hotel room. Clean. Still. Slightly unfamiliar. I stared at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly above me and asked myself the one question I had been avoiding for months. Did I still want this? The truth I wasn't ready to admit, not to her, not to anyone, was that I had grown in her absence. Not in the way people say when they mean they suddenly became successful or happy or better. But I had learned how to stop waiting for her. That was the hardest part. When you spend years building your life around another person, you don't realize how many little things depend on their presence: what you eat, when you sleep, how you decorate the living room. And when they're gone, you start noticing all the blank spaces that used to fill. I had spent the past 2 months relearning how to live in those blank spaces. She fell asleep on the couch before midnight. I could hear her breathing slow, the way she always did after crying. There was something gut-wrenching about seeing someone who had caused you so much pain still look so small, so vulnerable. I wasn't sure if it made me miss her more or if it simply reminded me that she was human, flawed, like me. In the morning, she was already up when I came downstairs. She'd made coffee black, just the way I like it, and she was sitting at the kitchen table reading a book she must have brought in her purse. She looked up and gave a soft smile. That smile used to mean everything. Now I didn't know what it meant at all. We made small talk. About the weather. About her job. She mentioned her apartment but didn't say much. She didn't ask if she could come back. She didn't ask if I missed her. And I didn't ask where she'd been emotionally all those months. It felt like we were both too scared to break the thin surface tension between us. Before she left, she stood in the doorway again, the same place she'd stood the night before, and said, "I didn't expect you to let me in." I told her I didn't expect her to knock. She nodded, like that made sense. And then she added something I hadn't anticipated. "I don't know what I want, but I know I still care." There it was again. Honesty, but not commitment. Emotion, but no clarity. And the strange part was, I didn't hate her for it. I didn't even feel resentful. I just felt tired. After she left, I sat in the same spot on the couch she had slept in. The cushion was still warm. And for the first time in months, I let myself admit something I hadn't dared to until that moment. Maybe I still cared too. But caring isn't the same as trusting. And missing someone isn't the same as being ready to start over. It wasn't closure. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something else, something murkier. Like the beginning of a conversation we should have had years ago, long before things fell apart. Like a door left cracked open, waiting to see who'd be brave enough to step through first. And I had no idea yet if that person was going to be me. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the way she looked standing in that doorway. It wasn't the tears, or the nervous smile, or even her words that stuck with me. It was her silence. The quiet pause between everything she said. Like she was holding back something she wasn't ready to admit, and maybe never would be. That silence echoed in my mind long after she was gone. I went back to my routine. Work, gym, grocery runs, folding laundry, making dinner for one. But even with all the normalcy, I noticed something had shifted. Her presence, even just for that one night, had stirred up things I thought I had buried. Doubts, hopes, regrets I didn't realize I was still carrying. A few days later, she texted me. Just one line. "Can we talk again? I'll bring coffee." My first instinct was to say no. Not because I didn't want to see her, but because I wasn't sure what another conversation would do to me. I had only just started feeling like myself again. Letting her back in, even a little, felt like cracking open a wound that hadn't fully healed. But curiosity and memory got the better of me. I told her yes. She showed up the next morning with 2 cups from the same local cafe we used to visit on Sunday mornings. No makeup. Hair tied back. She looked less like the polished version of herself I had gotten used to and more like the Marin I first fell in love with. And for a second, that scared me more than anything. Nostalgia has a way of rewriting the past in softer colors. I didn't want to mistake familiarity for love. We sat at the dining table again. This time, I sat across from her. No more pacing the kitchen or standing with folded arms. I wanted to look her in the eye. I wanted to understand. She was the one who spoke first. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, looking down at her coffee. "Leaving. Taking space. I convinced myself that I needed clarity and that I could only find it away from you. But all I found was how much I'd forgotten who I was before you, and how much that version of me doesn't exist anymore." I asked her what she meant. I kept chasing this idea of who I used to be: carefree, independent, spontaneous, like I could somehow undo the weight of 10 years just by walking out the door. But the truth is, you and I grew together. And when I left, I didn't feel free. I felt unfinished. Her voice cracked when she said that last word. And I could tell it cost her something to admit it. She didn't ask to come back. She didn't beg for another chance. She just told me what she felt and left the rest up to me. And that, somehow, was harder to process than if she'd thrown herself at my feet. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't ready to forget either. I told her, honestly, that I didn't know what we were anymore. that I didn't know if I could trust her with my heart after she walked away from it so easily. "I don't expect you to," she replied quietly. "But I just needed you to know I never stopped caring. I was lost, Grant. Not because of you. Because I didn't know how to be in a relationship and hold on to myself. I chose to run when I should have chosen to talk." We sat in silence after that. No dramatic music. No sweeping declarations. Just two people who had once built a life together, now trying to figure out if the foundation was still there beneath the cracks. Before she left, she asked one more thing. "Would you ever consider going to therapy with me? Not couples therapy. Not reconciliation. Just a starting point. A place to talk. To understand each other better, even if it didn't mean getting back together." And that was the first moment I saw something in her that hadn't been there before. Vulnerability. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that comes when someone's finally ready to stop hiding. I told her I'd think about it. She left. Again. But this time, she didn't feel so far away. It's strange how quickly emotions can turn on you. For weeks after she left, I lived in a kind of suspended reality. The silence in the house was overwhelming at first, but eventually, it became familiar, even comforting. I had built a quiet rhythm. I'd wake up alone, drink my coffee by the window, and read through old drafts of the novel I had once started and abandoned during the early years of our marriage. I began to feel something close to clarity. Not happiness, not yet, but clarity. And then she reappeared, and clarity turned into noise. After she asked about therapy, I kept expecting a follow-up. A text. A call. Some nudge that would push the next step forward. But nothing came. And part of me appreciated that. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't demanding. She'd said her piece and left me space to process it. But that silence, the very thing I had gotten used to, began to change. This time it wasn't empty. It felt charged. Like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a decision. I found myself walking through our old routines. I'd stop outside that same cafe she used to love and hesitate before going in. I'd think about the books she always left open on the nightstand, her half-finished mugs of tea scattered around the house, the way she used to hum while folding laundry. And then I'd remember how easily she had walked out, how simple it was for her to choose herself, and how hard it had been for me to put the pieces back together after she left. But here's the truth I hadn't told anyone, not even myself until then. I missed her. Not just the version of her I married. I missed who we were when we weren't tangled in quiet resentment and distance. I missed laughing with her over dumb movies. I missed how we used to lay in bed and talk about the future like it was a place we were already living in. I missed her presence. Even her silence had once meant something. But now? Now it just made me question everything. The thing is, you can't go back. People always say that relationships can heal, and maybe they can, but they never go back to the way they were. There's no rewind button. Only forward. And I wasn't sure if forward with her was still a path I could walk. So I did something I hadn't done before. I reached out. I messaged her, asking if she was serious about therapy. She replied almost immediately, "Yes. I already have someone in mind. No pressure. Just one session." For clarity, we met in a small, quiet office the following week. It wasn't cold or clinical like I'd feared. It actually felt more like someone's living room. There were plants, soft lighting, a little bowl of mints on the table. The therapist, a calm woman named Evelyn, didn't waste time on pleasantries. She just asked us to speak. Marin went first. She talked about the pressure she felt, not from me, but from herself. The expectation that she should know exactly who she was, even as life kept pulling her in different directions. She talked about fear. About fading inside the life she had chosen. About losing the ability to distinguish between what she wanted and what she thought she should want. I listened, silently. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because it was the first time she had said these things out loud. And hearing them was jarring and oddly relieving. When it was my turn, I told the truth. That I had felt abandoned. That I didn't need her to be perfect. I needed her to be present. That the scariest part wasn't her leaving. It was how easily I disappeared in her eyes before she walked away. I admitted that I had started to heal, that I wasn't the same man she had left behind. That if we were ever going to move forward, together or not, it couldn't be with one of us trying to drag the past behind us like deadweight. Evelyn said something simple after we both finished. Maybe this isn't about saving the old relationship. Maybe it's about figuring out whether a new one is even possible between the two of you. That line stuck with me for days. Because she was right. The truth wasn't whether I still loved Marin. I probably did in some form. The real question was whether we could create something different. something more honest. And whether either of us was brave enough to do it without falling back into the comfort of what we used to be. After the session, Marin and I went for a walk. Not far. Just around the block. We didn't hold hands. We didn't talk much. But when she turned to me and said, "Thanks for showing up," I realized something important. This wasn't about romance anymore. This was about two people trying to figure out who they were now, not who they used to be. And I was finally ready to ask myself if the man I had become could ever open the door again to the woman who left. I didn't want to admit how much I was still carrying. Not just the memories, those were expected. But the weight of unsaid things, the conversations we should have had years ago, the gentle neglect that built like dust in the corners of a once vibrant home. It had taken months of silence and her unexpected return to realize just how much I'd turned my own needs down to a whisper during our marriage. I had told myself I was being patient, supportive, a good man. But what I was really doing was shrinking, little by little, to keep the peace. Now, sitting across from her again in a neutral room with a stranger mediating, I was finally learning how to speak without flinching. And more importantly, how to listen without waiting for my turn to respond. That next week, we kept going to therapy. Not daily, not religiously, but enough to make it a pattern. We weren't a couple again, far from it. We were something else. Two people learning how to reintroduce themselves to each other after everything had already fallen apart. I stopped hoping for reconciliation and started watching her more honestly. I noticed how she fidgeted when she didn't have the right words. How she looked down every time I asked a hard question. How she was trying, even if she didn't fully know what she was trying for. In one session, she finally told me something I think I always feared. "I didn't leave because of you," she said quietly. "But I didn't stay because I didn't know how to be fully myself with you." That stung, more than I expected. Because I thought I had given her everything. Support, encouragement, room to breathe. But what I hadn't realized was that sometimes in trying to be someone's safety net, you can become a cage. And no matter how gentle the walls are, they're still walls. I asked her if she felt trapped with me. "No," she answered honestly. "I felt unseen." That hit harder than anger ever could. Because I had looked at her every day. I had made her tea without asking. Picked up her dry cleaning. Canceled trips to take care of her when she was sick. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped asking who she was becoming. I fell in love with a version of her I had memorized, and I didn't notice when she outgrew it. That night, after one of our most emotionally exhausting sessions, she came back to the house, not to stay, but just for dinner. I made something simple. Stir-fry, like we used to have on lazy Sundays. We ate in silence at first, like two coworkers sharing a break room. But eventually, she looked up at me with a softness I hadn't seen in years and said, "It feels familiar here." Not in a bad way. I nodded. Familiar can be safe. Or suffocating. Depends on what we do with it. We didn't talk about the future that night. We didn't say things like, "Maybe we'll try again," or "I still love you." We just shared a meal, washed dishes together like old times, and parted ways. But this time, the air between us didn't feel heavy. It felt open. And that, in its own quiet way, felt bigger than love. In the days that followed, she started showing up more. Never unannounced. Never with expectation. Sometimes just to talk. Sometimes just to sit in the garden and read, like she used to when things were still good. I'd find her out there barefoot in the grass, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. It was hard to look at her and not want to reach out. But I didn't. I respected the space. I needed it too. One Saturday morning, I found her in the kitchen pouring coffee, barefoot again, wearing one of her old sweaters she'd left behind. And without looking up, she said something that stopped me cold. "This isn't my home anymore. But it still feels like the only place I can breathe." I didn't answer right away. Because what do you say to something like that? She wasn't asking to move back in. She wasn't even asking for forgiveness. She was just trying to name the in-between. The space we were both quietly living in. And I realized then, what we had wasn't broken in one clean break. It had unraveled over time. Thread by thread. Word by unspoken word. But maybe, just maybe, if we were patient, if we kept showing up honestly, not as who we were, but as who we were now, we could start building something different. Not better. Not worse. Just real. And maybe that was the point. It happened on a Tuesday, without warning. She called me during lunch, something she hadn't done in years. Not just since she left, but even before then, our midday conversations had become rare. We had drifted into a rhythm of end-of-day catch-ups and shared exhaustion. But that afternoon, her name lit up my screen, and for a second, I just stared at it. I answered with a quiet, "Hey," and on the other end, She responded with something I wasn't expecting. Would you meet me at the old bookstore after work? That bookstore. The one tucked between the tailor shop and the bakery, the place we used to go when we didn't want to talk but didn't want to be home either. We'd spend hours there in silence, flipping through pages, exchanging glances across aisles. Sometimes we'd buy something. Sometimes we'd leave empty-handed, but it was always about more than the books. So I said yes. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting in the back corner, tucked into the same worn leather chair where she used to read poetry out loud to me when no one was around. She looked calm, but not relaxed. There was something urgent in the way she sat, elbows on her knees, fingers tapping against the spine of a book she wasn't reading. I sat down opposite her. No hug. No pleasantries. Just an unspoken understanding that we were here for something heavier than small talk. She didn't waste time. I've been going back through everything, she said, not just the things we said or didn't say, but who we were, who I was. I don't know if you felt it too, but somewhere along the way, I stopped being your partner and started being your shadow. And I let it happen. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was full of something softer. Regret, maybe. Or maybe just the kind of sadness that comes from seeing something clearly after it's too late to undo it. I told her the truth. That I had felt it too. That I had spent years trying to be enough, without ever really asking what that meant for her or for me. That I thought giving her space was the answer, not realizing how much she needed presence instead. That somewhere along the way, we both forgot how to be seen. She looked up at me with those eyes that used to feel like home. Do you think we forgot? Or stopped trying? That hit harder than anything she'd said so far. Because the truth is, love doesn't die in big explosions. It dissolves. Slowly. In neglected moments. In distracted dinners. In weeks where you go from teammates to roommates. You don't notice it when it starts. You only notice when you're sitting across from the person you once knew best and realize you don't know what to say anymore. I don't know, I said. Maybe both. She nodded slowly, then said something I wasn't expecting. I've been thinking about us, not the past, but the now. I don't want to go back to what we were. I don't think I can. But I keep wondering if there's a new version of us we haven't met yet. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was a possibility. A door cracked open, waiting. And suddenly, I realized how much of myself I had held back. Even now, after all the conversations, all the therapy, all the late-night reflections, there was still a part of me guarding the softest places. Not out of bitterness, but out of survival. Because love once cost me everything I had. Letting it in again, even in this unfamiliar shape, felt dangerous. But what scared me more, what truly shook me, was how much I wanted to say yes. Not yes to getting back together. Not yes to erasing the past. But yes to this version of her. This version of me. These two people sitting in a bookstore, trying to be brave in a world that had already tested them once. We didn't make any promises that day. No labels. No rushed decisions. We left with the same space between us we arrived with, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was intentional. When we stepped outside, it had started to rain lightly, the kind that barely touches the ground before disappearing. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded umbrella, and opened it. Without speaking, she tilted it slightly to cover me too. And for the first time in what felt like years, we stood there, side by side, not as husband and wife, not as exes, not as something broken trying to be glued back together, but just two people, sharing shelter. And somehow, that felt more intimate than anything we'd shared in a long time. There was no announcement. No dramatic turning point. No flowers, no speeches, no sweeping gesture to signal that something had changed between us. But it had. The following weeks were subtle. We didn't move in together. We didn't start over. We began, instead, by learning how to show up differently. She'd text in the mornings just to say she hoped my day was good. I'd bring her books I thought she'd like, just because I remembered she once said she missed being surprised. We didn't fall back into old habits. We created new ones. One Saturday, she invited me over to her apartment, something she'd never done since the separation. It was small, warm, filled with plants, and quieter than I expected. But there was peace in the way she existed in the space, no anxiety, no need to explain who she was trying to be. She handed me a mug of tea, and we sat on the balcony without talking for nearly an hour. When the sun started to set, she looked over at me and said softly, "This is the first time in a long time I feel okay being me." I didn't respond right away. I just reached over and placed my hand gently over hers. Because in that moment, I realized something had shifted in me too. I wasn't holding on to a past version of her anymore. I wasn't hoping she'd go back to who she used to be. And I didn't want to be the man who kept pretending nothing had changed. We had both changed. And the people we were now? They weren't broken. They were simply older, more aware, a little scarred, but still open to joy. Still willing to risk connection, even when it hurt. A few weeks later, she asked if I wanted to go away for the weekend. No pressure, she said. Just a road trip. Just us. Not as something we have to define. Just to see what it feels like. I agreed. And so we packed light. No expectations. Just a shared playlist, a tank full of gas, and a loose plan to drive until we felt like stopping. We stayed in a small cabin up north, nothing fancy. No TV. Spotty Wi-Fi. But every night, we sat by the fire, talking the way we used to, but somehow better. More honestly. More carefully. More fully. There were moments of laughter, long stretches of silence, even a few confessions that made us both tear up. But nothing felt forced. On the last night, as we sat by the lake wrapped in an old blanket, she leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "I don't want to lose this. Whatever this is." And I finally answered the one question that had been sitting inside me for months. You're not going to. Not because we had everything figured out. Not because we promised forever. But because we had finally learned how to be with each other without losing ourselves. We were partners, not in the same way we had once been, but in a way that felt more honest, more grown, more intentional. We didn't go back to who we were. We found something better. And this time, neither of us was walking away.